The reason this book made me feel so seen was because this is the funniest book I've ever read in my life. I cannot think about this book without feeling the most tender squeeze in my soul. It was like reading a chili pepper. One of the most deeply well-written books that I've ever read. Hello friends, today is a very special video that was voted on by my patrons, and in this video I'm going to be talking about LGBTQ centric books that made me feel seen. As somebody who is Black and Mexican and trans, it has been a lifelong struggle to see myself depicted on the page. And these books, these incredible books by amazing authors that I'm about to share with y'all, okay, cell phone.
Ruining the moment.
These incredible books are ones where I finally was able to see myself and feel centered, and I'm really excited to talk about each and every one of them in great detail and recommend them to you in hopes that they will do the same thing that they did for you that they did for me. Before we hop into the nitty and the gritty of this video, I would love to give a big shout out to its sponsor, which is none other than Open Cover Books. Open Cover Books is essentially going to be your new favorite thing. Their tagline is queer books for queer nerds, because shockingly, most of us are not white, cis, heterosexual men, and so we have to search for ourselves in books. This can be exhausting and frustrating, and it isn't the way that it has to go. Open Cover Books is centering queer-owned stories and narratives. They are an independent, also queer-owned store and recommendation service that vets titles and sends queer readers the very best. So if you want to see trans joy in space, or queer romance, or sapphic superheroes, anything you can think of, you have a place to go. So you can support them at opencoverbooks.com. They have an inquiry form for recommendations. It warmed my heart to learn about them, and I couldn't wait to support. I really loved that their recommendation inquiry sheet left space for the reader to detail their content warnings, things in books that they really would like to avoid so that they can have an easy reading experience. They also have links to their affiliates, and that includes physical books and audiobooks as well. I was really excited when the founder of the company reached out because what they are doing matters and they seem like a really cool person. I have the socials to Open Cover Books down below as well as the website, so do check them out. Do not lose out on the opportunity to support this growing online business and to find your new favorite book in the process. Thank you again to Open Cover Books for sponsoring this video and supporting my channel. It means a lot. And without further ado, let's get into these queer book recommendations. I have a bunch of books on this list. They are different genres, different age categories, different types of stories, all of that. The first book that I'm going to be talking about is Ace of Spades. I cannot remember the name of this author, but this book was absolutely everywhere a few years ago when it came out. People were very excited about this queer, Black, dark academic story about two kids. They are both attending an elite academic institution and just struggling to fit in there due to their Blackness, their queerness, and just generally being othered. Now these two characters are very, very different. I cannot remember their names. I just looked up their names and they are Chiamaka and Devon, and the two of them uncover the secret society within the school. Now this is a book that is really cool to go in knowing very little. I knew damn near nothing except for the buzzword, and I was pretty excited about that. Dark academia from BIPOC in particular is very interesting to me because it is often racialized and it explores themes that I don't often see explored by white authors writing in dark academia. And also I have noticed a lot of racism and a lot of classism, a lot of elitism in those books versus those books actually critiquing and analyzing those themes in a healthy way, if that makes sense. So if you were looking for a queer-centric dark academic book that doesn't have the problems, the pitfalls, the traps of the dark academic books that are centered in Barnes & Noble and Book Talk, this is going to be the one for you. The sapphic relationship I really, really enjoyed. Devon's queerness and his relationship I very much enjoyed as well. I like that it looked so much at friendship between Black folks and also friendships between Black and white folks as well. The thriller aspect was phenomenal, and I highly recommend the audio book. I read this book audibly and I absolutely do not regret it. It was a wonderful reading experience. It made me feel seen because it reflected my experience attending white academic institutions from the time that I was in elementary school all the way through college. I often felt othered. I often felt targeted. I often was targeted. I experienced bullying from my teachers as well as from peers, from people in leadership positions such as the principal who I went to for help. My mom went and sat down with all of my teachers and confronted them, and she spent like 2 hours arguing with them about how I was being treated. And this was before conversations about implicit bias, conversations about the very subtle racist ways that children of color are treated in schools were really popularized. And it was a hard time for me. So this book really spoke to that part of me, what I was going through. It was very affirming. I highly recommend it. I loved it. Then of course we have Vanished Birds by Simon Jimenez, which if you have been on this channel for more than a year, I'm sure you will know that I love this book. I recommend it as much as I can, and I will continue to do so until it gets an adaptation or more people just continue to read it, because that is my life's goal, is to get you to read this book. It is set in space. It is an adult-driven narrative, and we follow a cast of characters. We get to follow, of course, I'm blanking on the names. I used to be so good at remembering every detail about books, but as y'all who've been watching my channel know, I'm struggling with some sort of neurological disorder. I have a video on it down below, and my memory is declining by the day.
Love that for me.
What I can remember about this book, so you have a Black female protagonist who is the captain of the ship, and she is carrying precious cargo. She essentially was approached by this corporation to carry a boy who literally dropped from the sky onto this planet to the corporation's like headquarters across the galaxy or whatever. And the boy is dangerous, but she and her crew have no idea why, so they're keeping him isolated. You're also getting his perspective, and you are also getting the perspective of the Asian woman, I believe she is Japanese, who is leading this problematic organization, and she's a lesbian. And you get to follow these people, you get flashbacks from when they were younger, and the villain origin story of the Japanese character is fascinating. I think her name is Fumiko. And the quotations from this book, the queerness of this book, I think the boy character is queer and Fumiko is queer. I do not think Captain Nia is queer. And I just felt really seen through the boy character in his tenderness, in the way that he was exploring his queerness and how natural it was. I also really felt for Fumiko's character and her very problematic, tumultuous queer relationship, and the way that she's essentially aching and yearning and pining throughout the book, because feelings of queer longing really speak to me. And the author is queer. I believe that he identifies as gay. The way that he writes about queerness is unmatched. And this is a book that, if you're not a big fan of sci-fi, I still really encourage you to read it. If you're one of those people that's like, I want to try sci-fi. This is more literary science fiction. And honestly, if it is getting too technical for you, which I didn't find it too technical, but it does, kind of attempt to describe the time traveling element because they're using black holes to travel, I think it'll be very accessible, and you can always just skip those paragraphs. You know what I mean? Like if I'm getting overwhelmed by science in a book, I just skip that shit, especially as somebody who lives with dyscalculia. Next up, we're going to talk about Unwieldy Creatures by Addie Sai. I love Addie, and I've been working on setting up an interview with them for quite some time, but with my health and medical issues, it keeps falling apart. But my life's goal for this entire year is to interview this incredible author. This is a Frankenstein retelling. It is an Asian non-binary Frankenstein retelling. You get the perspective of Frankenstein's monster, of Frankenstein, and another character who is working in Frankenstein's lab underneath. It is very queer. It is very messy. There is the kind of villain origin. The reason this book made me feel so seen was because It talks about queerness in one of the most nuanced ways that I have ever witnessed. It talks about the ways that queer trauma can deeply damage a person in a way that causes them to perpetuate trauma. And that isn't something that we often talk about in society, and that's not something I often see depicted in queer narratives. I think it is really important to have queer villains, obviously not always depicting queer people as the villain, but I loved it. It was so nuanced. It spoke to the science nerd in me. I worked in a lab in college and I did research in college, and that is just, it definitely shaped me. So the scientist in me was thriving while reading this book. I have not read the source material, but I already know that this is going to blow the original work out of the water. I think that out of all of the Frankenstein retellings out there, this is the one. This is absolutely the one. The writing, all of it. And the ending is a bit controversial because a lot of people didn't like it. But personally, I think that was the only way the book could end. Okay, dog. No, don't help. Don't help. Are you a good girl? Yeah, are you a good girl? It is just an incredible, unmatched book. You have to read it. Next up, we have Burn Down, Rise Up by Vincent Tirado. This is a book that I recommend a lot. It is a YA horror, especially if you love insect body horror. I mean, come on. And it is set in the Bronx. You're following a group of teens who make the mistake of playing a creepy ass game in the subway, and they open a portal and all these fucking insects come out, and it is not fun for anybody. There's a lot of content warnings for this book. It is very, very intense, and the main character is queer and just crushing hard on this girl that she's been feeling for many years, and I love the way that their relationship budded. The reason that this spoke to me so much was, if you know me, you know my history, you'll know that my familia is from the Bronx. And my mother is a survivor of the Bronx burnings, and the Bronx burnings is a big focus within the book. So instead of me telling you about the Bronx burnings, it would really mean a lot to me if you just simply read the book. The author does a really fantastic job of going into that history, and it's not taught in schools. It's something that killed a lot of Black and brown people, and it went on for years. It affected not just my mother, but my abuelita. I love that that was brought into the horror of the book. The other reason that this book made me feel seen is because of the relationship with the main character and her papa. Her papi is very centered in his Afro-Latina spirituality and passes that down to her. If you know me, you'll know that I worship my ancestors. I have a very kind of intense spiritual practice, and it is rooted in my Afro-Mexican identity. This was the first time that I had seen young queer Afro-Mexican girl using her spirituality to fight back against evil. And that spoke to me so much. The book is fantastic. Vincent has a new book out, and it is like set around this lake, and there's horror around the lake, and I'm excited about it. Like Black people and water horror, y'all probably know the history there, so I'm really looking forward to that book. Then we have Iron Widow by Xiran J. Zhao. I loved this book. I was not expecting to love it so much, honestly, because it was so hyped, and I often have a tumultuous relationship with hyped books. But this was incredible. It follows a disabled Chinese main character. Unfortunately, my memory has eaten away at the synopsis. I also have been struggling because of my neurological issues with stuttering, and I'm trying to be less ashamed of this. For a while, I've been cutting my stuttering out of my videos, but I've decided not to do that anymore. I don't want to have to hide my issues or my disability or anything like that. So you may need to be a little bit patient with me at times. I've noticed that when I speak for long periods of time, that is when I stutter the most often. Bear with me as I pull up this book description. Iron Widow. When 18-year-old Zeshan offers herself up as a concubine pilot, her plan is to assassinate the ace male pilot responsible for her father's death. Boys dream of pairing up with girls to pilot chrysalises, a giant transforming robot that can battle the great mecha aliens that lurk beyond. And there's more of it. It's a futuristic dystopia, etc. So in this book, you end up following Zeshin as she is in this academy and training and blah, blah, blah. There are a lot of content warnings for this book. Content warnings of girls being exploited sexually, violence against children, and so forth. So do look those up. But there were so many things about this that made me feel seen. I loved the love triangle potential for polyamory representation. I loved the queer dynamics in this book and the way that the queer people came together. That meant a lot. I loved the discussions of what queer boys have to go through, what boys go through in general, and the way that that was handled. I'm starting to dissociate on this book because there's so much about it that I don't remember. So I'm gonna move on. But I just wanted to say that this book meant a lot, and I'm so excited to read the sequel. Next up, we have The Honeys by Ryan LaSala, which is a book that I just love so deeply. This is from a non-binary author, and it is horrific. In The Honeys, we are following a genderqueer teen named Mars, whose sister dies very unexpectedly upon coming home from summer camp and spending time with this group known as the Honeys. After losing his twin sister, he decides to attend the camp in her place and infiltrate this group to find out what the hell happened. But as he infiltrates this group, the lines between him and the Honeys start to blur, and he is undergoing some bodily changes. Now, this book is beloved to me because it kind of reminds me of Candyman, which came out in the early 90s. It was a really big part of my childhood because I watched it a lot with my mother, and it has bee horror, just like this book. There's a lot of bee body horror, a lot of honeycomb horror, bodily changes, that sort of thing. And I love how that was juxtaposed so well with the themes of the book itself, themes of being assigned male at birth and being genderqueer and trying to fit in and have community with cis boys and also queer boys. Mars experiences so much bullying at this camp, and you can see the way that obviously it hurts him, but the way that he still aches to fit in with these boys, even while being repulsed by the toxic masculine ideals that they've been taught. But you also get to see him melding with this group of girls who are so beautiful and obsessed with themselves and their own beauty and their goals and each other. I love that this book uplifted femininity and the relationships that can form between girls. Those relationships are so often demonized, but it also talks about trans exclusivity, and oh, it just was so great. One of the best audiobooks that I've ever read in my life. Definitely don't miss out on The Honeys. Then we're gonna talk about Babel. I have a spoiler-filled reading log on this book that is up for my patrons. It came out last year. This book made me sob my fucking eyes out. Yay! I've waited my entire life for this moment. I'm so happy. It's just a lot. I'm just so sad. R.F. Kuang never fails to break my fucking bones. And if you're not familiar with this, this is a dark academic book that is set in Oxford. And in this book, you are following a boy named Robin and his friends as they go to Oxford in order to work with silver, which has several magical properties. But they begin to learn about the role of silver being used to colonize the world. And Robin is from China. He was taken from China by one of the teachers at the school in order to serve the school and to serve the empire, essentially. And it's about how these kids come to terms and what they decide to do about it. Now, it is pretty clear in the book that Robin and Rami, I believe his name is Rami, he was probably my favorite character, are in love with each other. And it is one of those queer yearning, queer pining things. And I love that. I love relationships, representation of relationships between characters where they are both queer and not able to get together. It is one of my favorite tropes, two characters pining for each other, even if they're not queer. Rin and Najah are a really fantastic example. These characters who want to get together and want to be together, but life circumstances keep pulling them apart. So you're just constantly filled with this desire to see them together and waiting for it. And I just love that form of suffering. Again, seeing these kids push back against this kind of evil academic institution meant a lot to me, seeing what they were enduring at this institution, the racism so casually violent. It spoke to me. Next up, we have Just by Looking at Him by Ryan O'Connell, which it frustrates me every single day that this book is not getting more love. This is from either the writer or one of the writers on Queer Eye, and he lives with cerebral palsy, I believe. I'm almost certain that it is cerebral palsy. Yes, it is. My memory just kicked in.
Level up.
He lives with cerebral palsy, and in Just by Looking at Him, you are following a gay man who is also a Hollywood writer. He's struggling at work. He is struggling with his partner and joy in his relationship. He is struggling to rectify the way that people look at his body and the way that his body is not seen desirable. He is struggling with self-image and self-love, and also alcoholism, and I believe also drug use. Despite all those very heavy themes, this is one of the funniest fucking books I've ever read in my life. I was crying laughing. And actually, let me rephrase, this is the funniest book I've ever read in my life. I am one of those people that often finds comedy in books flat, because comedy in books is a difficult thing to land.
This book was so fucking funny, y'all.
And there was so much within it that spoke to me. I found myself nodding along to the struggles that he had with his body, not because our bodies are the same, but because some of the ways that he was feeling are ways that I have felt. And I loved the way that queer disabled men's bodies were highlighted and appreciated. Cerebral palsy folks and their bodies are so often demonized in our society in such a cruel, disgusting way. Folks with physical disabilities are so often looked down upon and are put up as the objects of shame and pity, which is awful. And this book so beautifully refuted that narrative. You have to read it. So this book might surprise you, but it is A Great and Terrible Beauty by Libba Bray. I read this book in high school, and it was potentially the first queer book that I read, and especially queer fantasy. Set in 1895, it follows Gemma Doyle, a 16-year-old girl who moves from India to a finishing school in England after her mother commits suicide under mysterious circumstances. Gemma is able to join a circle of friends, but she remains plagued by mysterious visions that she's been warned to block out. And I believe that these friends end up going into a magical alternate world that they consistently visit. Correct me if I'm wrong. This book was a queer awakening for me.
I had many queer awakenings.
It was just one of those things that was like a little push. I was like, wait, girls can touch each other? Girls can kiss? That's an option? And this is a series that I really want to reread and analyze to see if it holds up in 2023, especially from this white girl moving from India and some of the, I want to reanalyze the queer themes. I want to check it out again, and I miss it. I don't have a whole lot to say about this one, but it definitely struck a chord with me. The Lesbianas Guide to Catholic School by Sonora Reyes did a lot for me. Again, this is a story where you have a Mexican girl attending an institution and just not feeling at home there. So she is Mexican and attending a Catholic school, and you know, struggling with the way that her queerness is looked within this school. She's got a crush. She's got a really close relationship with her family. She and her brother are tight, and the relationship between them hit. The conversations of queerness, the sapphic joy, the Mexican identity, all of that, the writing, the audiobook, it just spoke to me. It hit. It's one of those books that adults who struggle to enjoy YA, I really recommend to them, and I think that they would enjoy. I am an adult who struggles to enjoy YA. I have my whole life, even when I was a young adult. I just have always preferred books by adults, and so when I find YA books that I really vibe with, it means a lot to me. There's no way I can have this video without talking about A Boy with a Bird in His Chest. I did a video last year where I used a book recommendation service, and in that experiment I read the books that they recommended to me. I filled out this this detailed information sheet about my reading taste, books I love, books I don't love. And they sent me 3 books by surprise. So you should definitely check out that video to see how that experiment went. This was one of the books that they sent. I cannot think about this book without feeling the most tender squeeze in my soul. It is the story of this boy who is literally born with a bird inside of his chest. And his mother hides him from the world because she wants to protect him. And he has to protect this bird. You are following him and the bird inside of him as he grows and has to hide and fight for his life. There are medical doctors who are pursuing him and hoping to dissect him for scientific reasons. So there's lab horror, and that is a trope that I really, really enjoy. The queerness was tender, it was seamless, it was wonderful. The writing was just achingly beautiful, y'all. It was incredible. I highly recommend this book. It is so underloved, and if you want to see, you know, like my full thoughts on it, my details, my reading experience, you should definitely check out that video. It's going to be linked down below. And for those of you who are looking for a book that is similar to A Boy with a Bird in His Chest, or if A Boy with a Bird in His Chest sounds interesting to you, you also have to read The 30 Names of Night. The 30 Names of Night is unmatched. Also, I love that there's A Boy with a Bird in His Chest, 30 Names of Night, and Vanished Birds, and every single one of those books have bird themes, have avian themes. 30 Names of Night is by Zain Jukadar. A closeted Syrian-American trans boy sheds his birth name and searches for a new one 5 years after the death of his mother. He's been unable to paint since his mother's ghost began to visit him each evening. Oh my God, I forgot about that element. I love how elders are brought into the story and the commentary that is in the book about immigration, and oh my God, it's just so good. The writing is unmatched. I was blown the fuck away. I was like, where is the Pulitzer? Give the whole book an Oscar. And how could I forget You Made a Fool of Death with Your Beauty by Akwaeke Emezi. Akwaeke is my favorite author. I owe a great deal to the deity that they are. This book is a romance, an adult romance.
And y'all know that I'm not a romance fan, but
my God, this book spoke to me so aggressively. You're following Fegi, who is I believe she's 25, grieving artist, and she's grieving the loss of her fiance, her partner, and she begins to date again. She's putting herself out there. She meets this man whose name is Nasir, and she's trying to decide if she wants to be more with him. And he offers to bring her to his father's island for a vacation. The second she lays eyes on his father, she falls in love. So there's an age gap romance, there's a forbidden love situation. Fegi is bisexual. The man, Alim, that she falls in love with is bisexual. And he is a chef. So there's just amazing food porn in this book. It is incredible. I loved how tender it was. I am really drawn to books that talk about male queerness, specifically sensitive boys, specifically sensitive Black boys, and Latine queer men who are working through shame surrounding their femininity and gender expression. Those books really speak to me, and there was a lot of that in this book. I loved how it balanced the grief with the romance and the joy. I loved the descriptions of Fegi thriving and living her best, beautiful, dark-skinned Black girl life. I loved the relationship that she had with her best friend, and how she and her best friend have slept together. I love that because it kind of represented how so many of us who are queer have slept with our friends at some point. Especially in Minneapolis, where I live, it's like if you have a friend, if y'all are queer and you have a friend, chances are you have boned at some point. It just is how it is. And the closeness that comes from these friendships as a result of that, I think honestly that is a really beautiful thing. And it was depicted so well and so casually in the book. This is not going to surprise you. Lead Me Astray by Sandy Warner. I talk about this book every day, it feels like. It is a paranormal romance, shocking, and it is a romance between a werewolf, an empath, and a ghost. And it's one of those books where you're solving the murder of one of the characters. That is a trope that just really doesn't interest me in books or movies. It was awesome. The mystery actually in this book I found to be the weakest point. And maybe it's not that it was weak, I just think that I was so interested in everything else that was going on. I love that you had this tender, black, innocent, virgin ghost who is in this polyamorous, budding, orgy-ass relationship with a temperamental vampire who I believe is South Asian and a Japanese intersex empath character. Their abilities, their strengths were so different, their personalities were so different, the sex scenes were spicy, steamy, all of that. It was like reading a Chili Pepper. I loved it. I thought the writing was great. I thought it was fun. It didn't take itself too seriously while also handling some really sensitive topics and just being joyful. I loved it. I loved it. We are going to close out this video with 3 of my favorite books of all time. Punch Me Up to the Gods by Brian Broom. This is a nonfiction recommendation, and it is from a queer black man named Brian, and it is a memoir of his life. In it, he details his emotional recovery, that journey from child abuse, his drug use, and the tumultuous relationships that he has had with other queer men, experiences dating white men. This really spoke to me as somebody who has a lot of trauma from dating white queer people, and experiencing a lot of colorism within the queer community, in experiencing what it is like to see how your white partners treat their white partners versus you. Seeing how you are always the last option, how you are second best. That kind of thing that was handled so well. God, and this book was just one of the saddest things that I have ever read, but it was everything that I needed. It was tender, and I loved that the book was broken apart into sections, kind of formatted through Gwendolyn Brooks's famous Pulitzer-winning poem, We Real Cool, which is one of my favorite poems of all time. I could recite it in my sleep. It talks a lot about what it does. I think it's like 7 lines. It is short and it hits, and it's about the life expectancy of black boys in America. God, the book is incredible. Coming in at number 2, we have Dear Senthuran by Akweke Emezi, which is the memoir of this incredible deity where they kind of break apart their life through letters to people that have impacted them. This is the book that gave me the courage and the strength to come out as using y'all as a form of address, and really feeling comfortable being out about being plural-selved. It made hiding who we really were impossible. It made us ready to step into the light. Seeing Akweke live so loudly as a spirit made the spirits inside of us comfortable being visible. And it was this amazing moment where we knew that it was time, and it is what encouraged us to start writing our book, which is, we are very excited to announce, a YA Robin Hood retelling following an Afro-Mexican teenager in the Bronx who shares a body with their ancestors. We've never shared that information before on this channel. We've been writing the book for 2 years now, and we only share excerpts and news about it, updates with our patrons, our heart level patrons. So if you are interested in becoming a heart level patron, that is a perk. We also just shared the naughty, steamy opening scene from our upcoming lesbian novella, which is called Studdenly in Love. It is a romance between 2 best friends who are studs and have to overcome their toxic masculinity in order to love each other romantically. And one of them has a secret identity as a stripper. So we're very, very excited about that. And the final book that we are going to talk about is Here Comes the Sun by Nicole Dennis Benn. I was not ready. I was not ready. I was basically my father when I was born. I was not ready. Okay. This book fucking gutted me. This is one of the saddest things I've ever read in my fucking life, and I loved it. It is set in Jamaica, and we are following 3 characters. I think it's 3. Yep, we're following 3 characters. They are a family. 2 sisters, one who is in high school, one who is an adult, and the mother. We're following mainly Margot, who is the elder sister, and she is working at this resort to put her sibling through medical school. She really wants her sister to be a doctor, but Thandi, the sister, just wants to be an artist. That's all she actually wants. All she wants is to draw and vibe. We're also following their mother as well, and it is about the abuse and trauma that's within this family, rectifying queerness, Thandi's queerness and Margot's queerness. It is one of the most deeply well-written books that I've ever read. Every line hit, and the setting was vivid. I felt like I was eating the fruit. I felt like I was walking on the land. I felt like I was inside each of these characters. Margot is a queer villain character. I don't even want to call her morally gray. She's morally fucked, and that is a product of the queer trauma that she has experienced where she lives. And that is an important story to tell. The book really mattered, and I loved it. Hella content warnings though. So my battery is dying, which means I'm going to sign off. Please consider joining my Patreon. It would mean a lot. If you want more content from me, you can check me out on Instagram. I've been posting there a lot and having a lot of fun. And then I've got links to my other videos down below. And don't forget to check out Open Cover Books. Till next time.